well, from here, like it's been a much closer supporter.
The eradication of Hamas. We will bring back all our hostages. We will guarantee that Gaza will no longer be a threat to Israel, and we will return the residents of the northern parts of Israel safely back to their homes. The war will not end until we obtain all of these goals, including the safe return of our northern residents to their homes. I want to tell you, this will happen. It will happen just as it has in the south. My friends, residents of the north, I am proud of you. I am proud of your endurance, and I am totally committed to your safety, to the rehabilitation of your towns, and to your future. So far, thanks to the bravery of our fighters in the IDF, in the Shin Bet, in the Mossad, and the Israeli police, we have achieved incredible accomplishments on the 7 fronts of this war, which are the object of appreciation throughout the world and radiate Israel's strength throughout the Middle East, and primarily to Iran. We have destroyed big parts of Iran's aerial defense, of its ability to manufacture missiles, and we destroyed a big part of its nuclear plan. I am determined to do everything that it takes in order to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. This threat has always been my top priority, and even more so today, when we're hearing the repeated announcements by Iran's leaders of their intention to obtain nuclear weapons. To me, removal of this threat is the #1 goal in order to guarantee the survival and future of the state of Israel. In Gaza, we dismantled the Hamas battalions. We killed about 20,000 terrorists. We killed Sinwar, we killed Def and other senior officials in that organization, and returned 125 of our hostages. We are obligated to return the 101 hostages, alive and dead, that are still in Gaza, and to bring an end to the terrible suffering of their families. And of course, we are committed to finish the destruction of Hamas. In Judea and Samaria, we are destroying hundreds of terrorists and terrorist infrastructure, and have been operating everywhere that there are terrorist cells. In Yemen, we strike in a port where the international coalition has not done that before. In Iraq, we are stopping big drone attacks, and still we have a lot of challenges ahead. In Syria, we are systematically thwarting Iran, Hezbollah, and Syrian armies' attempts to pass armaments into Lebanon. Assad must understand that he is playing with fire. And now to the 7th front, Lebanon. Hezbollah has chosen to attack us from there on October 8th. It's been a year. It's not the same Hezbollah anymore. We pushed Hezbollah decades back. We've killed Nasrallah, he's the head of the snake. We've killed all of the leaders. We've destroyed most of the rockets and missiles. We've killed thousands of terrorists, and we destroyed the underground and terrorist infrastructure near our borders that have been built over years. We attacked strategic targets throughout Lebanon and destroyed many targets in the Dakhya. Lebanon is not the same. Citizens of Israel, only 3 months ago, all of this would have sounded like science fiction, but it's not. We made it. And I would like to say to you, in any given moment during this war, I have my eyes on the fronts at the same time. This is what I did. This is what I had in mind when, at the beginning of the war, I decided to focus on Gaza and not to open another front in Lebanon. This is what I did a few months ago when the conditions were ripe to turn our gaze northward. And then we attacked Hezbollah. This is what I did after the attack by Iran when we meticulously decided how and when to strike back. And this is what I'm doing today as well. I'm looking at all of the fronts simultaneously. I'm seeing the bigger picture. And I am determined to let our soldiers, our brave soldiers, and give them all of the means they need to stay alive, stay safe, and bring us the victory. And that's why tonight I will bring before the cabinet a plan for a ceasefire in Lebanon. The duration of the ceasefire depends on what happens in Lebanon. We have an understanding with the United States. We are maintaining our full liberty to take military operations. If Hezbollah tries to attack us, if it arms itself, if it rebuilds infrastructure next to the borders, we will attack them. If they launch missiles, if they dig tunnels, we will attack. Yes, I can hear people saying that if we start a ceasefire, we will not be able to attack, we will not be able to resume the war. Let me remind you, this is exactly what people said to me when we entered into the ceasefire in Gaza, in which we released our hostages. People said we would not risk fighting, but we did. And how? People say to me, well, Hezbollah will lay low for a year or two, will rearm itself, and then it will attack us. But Hezbollah will commit a breach of the agreement not only when they fire at us, but even when they try to rearm themselves. For any such breach, we will react very forcefully. I know there are those who don't believe we will do that, but many didn't believe that we would enter with ground forces into Gaza, and we did. People didn't believe that we'll enter into Shifa and Khan Yunis, and we did. People didn't believe that, faced with immense international pressure, we would enter into Rafah and the Philadelphia corridor. Not only did we enter these places, we attacked them. And how? There were many people who didn't believe that we would ever attack in Lebanon, and we attacked there too. We attacked there very forcefully in a huge sophistication that took everybody in the world by surprise. So after all of that, maybe we should start believing in our determination, in our commitment to obtaining victory. So why is this the right time for a ceasefire? There are three main reasons. First, focusing on the Iranian threat, and there's no need to expand. Second, refreshing our forces and rearming our troops. And it's no secret. There have been delays, big delays, in the supply of arms. And this delay is about to stop soon. We will arm ourselves with sophisticated arms that will help us protect our troops and give us even greater force to complete our missions. And the third reason for a ceasefire now, isolating Hamas. From the second day of the war, Hamas was counting on Hezbollah fighting together with it. And once Hezbollah is eliminated, Hamas is left alone. Our pressure on Hamas will grow stronger, and this will help us in the sacred mission of bringing back our hostages, citizens of Israel. In the last year, we have flipped things over. We were attacked on seven fronts, and we fought back. We are now changing the face of the Middle East. And all of this we are doing thanks to our brave soldiers, thanks to your resilience, and thanks to the strong management of this war. I said many times, a good agreement is an agreement that is enforced. And we will enforce it. God willing, we will establish our security, we will help our north flourish, and together we will continue through to victory.
There we are. That was the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu essentially saying that he is about to present a ceasefire deal to the full Israeli cabinet. And that is a ceasefire deal, to be clear, with Hezbollah in Lebanon. No such deal is happening with Hamas in Gaza. He said it is not the same Hezbollah. We have pushed Hezbollah back decades. He said, we've killed its leaders, we have destroyed its infrastructure. Only 3 months ago, he said, it would have sounded like fiction to say this, but, quotes, we made it, he said. And then he went on to give the reasons for the timing of this ceasefire. He said, 1, to focus on the Iranian threat, 2, to refresh our troops, to rearm, and 3, to isolate Hamas, which is an interesting point given that Iran and certainly Hezbollah had always linked the two wars going on in Gaza and in Hezbollah. Let's go to Ali Bunkel, who is in Jerusalem. And, well, Alistair, I don't quite know what the process is here. The Security Cabinet had met. Now we've heard from Netanyahu saying he's presenting a peace deal to the full cabinet. Do we assume then that this is a deal that's done?
Yeah, it's slightly confusing. And I wonder whether or not the timing for that statement, as we were talking an hour or so ago, Mark, was to coincide with Israeli prime time, to hit the TV networks when a lot of people around Israel sat in front of their televisions. But at the same time, it might be slightly premature because I didn't hear him announce that a ceasefire had been agreed. I think what might have happened is he's presented the proposal to the Security Cabinet. There are reports here on citing some of the Israeli television networks that the Security Cabinet approved that deal. And now it will need to go to the full cabinet. So, I mean, we're talking here about the structure of the sort of inner sanctum of Israeli government. Now, if it has been approved by the Security Cabinet, if we make that assumption, then I think it's pretty much a fait accompli that it will pass the full cabinet, not least because some of the voices that could be most vociferously opposed to it, the likes of Itamar Ben-Gvir, the National Security Minister, perhaps Bezalel Smotrich, the Finance Minister, well, they sit in the Security Cabinet. So if it's already past their reckoning, then I think it will pretty easily pass the full cabinet. But what he didn't outline there was that a ceasefire was rubber stamped from an Israeli government point of view, and there was no detail about when it would come into play, if it comes into play, and exactly how it will shape up. It was a speech, a statement that was a justification of his achievements really over the last year and a bit, not just with regards to Hezbollah, but also in Gaza too. I think it was a statement to try and convince any skeptical Israelis, and there are many, that a ceasefire is the right thing to do and now is the right time to do it. But believe me, not everybody is on board with it. I mean, there was one phrase that stuck out to me when he said to the residents of the North, I'm proud of you. Well, I'm not sure that that will land on particularly sympathetic ears amongst the residents of the North, either those who have remained or those who have been displaced and living in hotels for around 14 months. There is a feeling amongst many of the kibbutzim, both in the north and along the Gaza border, that the Israeli Prime Minister has rather abandoned them, and they feel that the job has not yet been completed sufficiently in southern Lebanon for them to return home safely. So I don't think we're at a position quite yet where we can say that a ceasefire has been agreed by all sides and it will come into play at X or Y hour, but it does seem like we are getting slowly closer.
OK, Alistair, for the moment, thanks very much indeed. Let's just go quickly to Washington, and we're joined by James Zogby, founder of the Arab American Institute. Thank you for being with us. And we've just heard from Benjamin Netanyahu, and it looks like that a ceasefire deal with Lebanon, with Hezbollah rather, is about to be done. First of all, what do you make of it?
Well, color me skeptical. The details yet are to be known. And frankly, from what I've seen, it is a very fragile deal that depends on a lot of conditions that Israel itself is imposing. Well, look, we've been down this road so many times before. I like to compare it to the little boy who cried wolf story. This is the big boys who cried peace and said, peace is at hand. We've got to deal with Hamas. We've got a deal coming very soon. We've got to deal with Hezbollah. I'm not sure it's there. And the Prime Minister's speech right now was more of a campaign speech, outlining how wonderful he is and how great he has done and all of the successes he's had. But there were so many questionable items there. For example, that what's holding up Hamas is Hamas counting on Hezbollah. Hezbollah made the point that while there was a linkage, early on they said that there was no way that they were going to engage in full-scale war with Israel. They were just tweaking and provoking and kind of being a thorn in their side. Hezbollah, if this deal actually works, has nothing to do with whether or not Israel continues in Gaza, and Hamas is not counting on anyone to come to their rescue. That was a fiction, I think, created here in the West to justify what Israel is doing. The reality is that there's a genocide in Gaza right now, and it's continuing, and this mopping up and cleaning out the North, denying humanitarian aid in the North, has nothing to do with Hezbollah or any threat from Iran. It's Israel wanting to literally vacate the northern third of the country and create a buffer zone out of it. So there's a lot of questions I have, including from what I've seen of the deal, quote unquote deal. For example, it's supposed to be U.S. and Israel and France are supposed to be enforcers on one side, but Netanyahu says he will not accept France unless they rescind their decision to honor the decision of the ICC. Will France agree to that? I don't know. And several other conditions that Israel is imposing on the deal that I think raise some real questions for me.
Right. So, I mean, and one of the first questions is what you are saying about whether this actually works. I mean, in the past, it's been down to UNIFIL, the UN peacekeeping force, and presumably the Lebanese army may have a role. But do you think it is going to take much more than that to make sure this ceasefire holds?
Listen, Lebanon desperately wants an end to the bombing. I've been speaking with people in Beirut, and it's a nightmare. I mean, one young woman who lived with my family back in the 80s been forced to move 4 times because the 3 previous places were all bombed out, in Dahia, in Ras Al Naba, and then in Sidon, and she and her family have nowhere to go right now. They want it to end. Certainly in the South, people want it to end, but let's understand that Israel has done in the South what they didn't done in Gaza. Villages are destroyed, homes have been ruined. Netanyahu wants his people to go back, but the Lebanese are going to have nowhere to go back to because Israel has done a scorched earth policy in the South. So the question is, will the Lebanese be able to accept it? Not the Lebanese government, they're not going to play a role here. But Hezbollah, remember, is not just a tool of Iran as people see it. It's more than that. It is a representative of a disenfranchised, substantial population in Lebanon, the Shia community, who look to it for leadership. And if Hezbollah doesn't provide it, Hezbollah 2.0 will provide it. And the reality is that you now have an enormous dislocated population in Lebanon that is furious at the fact that they have been bombed out and forced to move multiple times, have lost many members of their family, have lost all their property. There's going to be a lot of difficulty here. It's not just Netanyahu and his people living in hotels. It's the Lebanese who have to answer as well to what the conditions of this deal are. And one of the conditions of the deal, as I've seen it, is that Israel will be resupplied by the U.S. For all the weapons it's expended, so that they can rearm to the point they were before October 7th. But Israel reserves the right to bomb Hezbollah sites if they see any rearming on the part of Hezbollah. Look, there are those in Lebanon who say that's great. We don't want Hezbollah to rearm. But this is a deal that is so fragile and based on conditions that I think are just going to be impossible to meet. So, as I said, color me skeptical.
Okay. James Zogby, Thank you very much for reacting to that. Appreciate your time. And if you're just joining us, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has just been talking about a ceasefire deal with Hezbollah. He said he will present that deal to the Israeli cabinet, the full Israeli cabinet tonight. This is after a meeting of the Security Cabinet. And it seems to end growing speculation that a deal was being finalised and follows continued Israeli airstrikes, I should say, on Beirut, heavy airstrikes on Beirut throughout the day. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, is here, and James Ogby speaking there about a lack of confidence in the ceasefire deal. Do you suspect here that Hezbollah has pulled back, Iran has effectively pulled back?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, Iran has been restraining Hezbollah throughout this war from using its full firepower. As you said earlier, after 2006, Hezbollah rebuilt massively. And one of the things they did was supply themselves, with Iranian help, with 150,000 in the end, missiles buried in the hills of southern Lebanon and up the Bekaa Valley. And the fear was that Iran would allow them to use that. But Iran is always, the assumption is, told Hezbollah not to use it because they want that to remain as an insurance policy for the eventual day, possibly when Israel attacks Iran's alleged nuclear weapons program. So Iran has never allowed Hezbollah fully off the leash and is unlikely to do so now because there's a lot left. There's not so much left of Hezbollah to be let off the leash. I think that the questions remain. First of all, is it going to be approved by the cabinet? Yes, almost certainly. It's a massive cabinet, 37 members. It's enough to fill a small cinema, and there will be a lot of noise and a lot of grandstanding. But if the Security Cabinet's approved it, Netanyahu's recommending it, it will be approved. But the question now is what happens in the 60-day truce that we expect to happen, and will then that allow further sort of arrangements to be put in place for a longer-lasting ceasefire? The assumption is that Hezbollah is finished as a military fighting force for now, and therefore will not go back to attacking Israel, for at least for those 60 days, and will be restrained, as we were saying, by Iran from doing so. But beyond that, how can the Israelis be assured, particularly those who are being encouraged now to go back to their homes in the north, be reassured that Iran will not allow Hezbollah to rearm and then be a threat again at some point in the future? Right,
and just on the other end of the country, he did talk about we are committed still to eradicate Hamas, so clearly he thinks that has not been achieved, and we're committed still to getting the hostages back, those hostages that remain. So, basically saying Israel's still at war.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that their objectives, and Netanyahu's objectives in the north, are very different to his objectives in the south. In the north, it was to neutralise that threat that Hezbollah basically posed ever since October the 8th, when they attacked Israel, that led to tens of thousands of Israelis fleeing and being evacuated. And his aim, it was to prevent that and neutralise that threat and to prevent Hezbollah from posing that threat again in the future. He feels confident enough that for now that threat has been neutralised. In the south, though, his war aims have always been much more maximalist, to totally destroy Hamas, to destroy its leadership. Well, he's done that pretty effectively, or his forces have, and to get the hostages home. On those other points, the hostages and the total destruction of Hamas, that's a much taller order, and they don't seem any closer yet to doing so. What they're trying to do now is what James Ogby was referring to there, which is clearing a third of the north of Gaza. Cynics, critics are saying that's an attempt to ethnically cleanse Gaza. The Israelis are saying they need to do this to destroy Hamas. But what happens in the south of Gaza, even if you achieve that in the north? Hamas remains a formidable fighting force.
And I think I heard Benjamin Netanyahu say that they'd killed 20,000 terrorists, I think he said, in Gaza, which means an awful lot of civilians have died. And as this war goes on, more civilians will die.
Yeah, and when I say it remains a formidable fighting force, that's in terms of its potential. They've killed, they say, thousands of Hamas fighters, but the idea of Hamas, the spirit of resistance, that remains very strong, if not stronger, because so many Palestinians are going to be encouraged to rejoin and be recruited by Hamas in the wake of this terrible destruction in Gaza. They've been very effective in killing many fighters north of the border, but there are as many as 90,000 Hezbollah fighters left they could regroup and rearm. So he's got to reassure Israelis that that threat in the north can't come back and threaten the Israelis anytime in the near future. But in Gaza, it's a much taller order doing so, because he's got to destroy Hamas and prevent Hamas being restored and being re-energized as a threat at any point in the future as well.
Yeah, stay with us, because he also talked about Syria and Assad, and we might talk about that in just a moment. Let's go back to Jerusalem, though, and our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. So, Alistair, just try and explain where we are in this process with this deal. And already we're seeing comments about the fragility of the deal.
So I think in terms of where we are in the process, I think it's not a done deal yet. It is still in the cabinet stage with the Israeli government probably being argued about. I imagine that there's briefings from the Israeli military and security officials as to what they've achieved against Hezbollah. Netanyahu will be trying to convince any dissenters in the room that it's the right moment to do this. There's reports that President Trump has seen the deal and he's given it his thumbs up. And I think the reason we heard from Netanyahu there was because it was prime time, as I said, here in Israel, and he wanted to address the Israeli public and explain to them, not explain to them, he wanted to list his achievements over the last 14 months, not just in relation to Hezbollah, but also to Gaza as well. The key to a lot of this, the key to any ceasefire being more than a short-term affair, is the enforcement of it, is preventing Hezbollah from returning to southern Lebanon and from rearming. And no one really knows yet, either because we haven't been told or it hasn't been worked through properly, exactly how that's going to happen. I mean, we know some details, we think. We think that the Lebanese armed forces will reposition into the south of Lebanon and effectively fill a void left by Hezbollah if Hezbollah does pull back to north of the Litani River. We think there's going to be some sort of oversight mechanism involving representatives from Israel, from Lebanon, the United States, France, and possibly Britain. For the last week or so, actually, Britain's been sort of mentioned in conjunction with this, kind of just sort of on the sides, but nobody seems to have confirmed any British involvement. But how that oversight mechanism will work, I don't know. Will there be some sort of reporting channel whereby if Israel feels that Hezbollah is violating the agreement, they first report it through those channels before taking military action? We'll have to wait and see. But those, I think, will be the key states involved in oversight mechanism. But I think, in all this, we're missing also one key nation that will be involved in some of the implementation of it, and that is Iran, because ultimately, if Hezbollah is going to play the game and withdraw and not rearm, not return to the south, or if they're going to do the opposite in time and try and rearm back in the south along the Israeli border, then Iran will no doubt be involved in that in some shape or form. So I think Iran, albeit not part of any of these discussions, is absolutely key to what happens in the future. The other area, as you mentioned, is Syria, because that is a key smuggling route for Iranian weapons to travel into Lebanon. So how will that be monitored? How will the Israelis demand that they're allowed to police and patrol that, particularly if the Lebanese armed forces, who are pretty stretched really, are relocating some of their forces to the south? Will they still be able to have full oversight and control of that rather porous mountainous border? These are all sort of big outstanding questions that are leading a lot of people to conclude that, this, I mean, let's not, get away from the fact that it will be a significant moment and it will be huge welcome relief, particularly for millions of Lebanese, but also for many Israelis who are exhausted and fed up of 14 months of war. But there's a lot of people pretty skeptical about exactly how this ceasefire will play out, whether or not it's for the short term or whether or not it can be one for the ages.
OK, Alistair, thanks very much indeed. Let's bring in Rim Montaz now, who's editor-in-chief of Carnegie Europe's Strategic Europe blog. She's a Lebanese journalist and analyst. Welcome. Thanks very much indeed. How convinced are you that this ceasefire deal, if it is a ceasefire deal, can lead to a prolonged peace in Lebanon?
I mean, I think we're very far from a prolonged peace in Lebanon. If you look at the details of this supposed deal, every step of the way is a minefield on its own. And so the risk of it falling apart at every step of the way is pretty high at this stage. I think, your correspondents who were on before me laid out the reasons pretty well. There's a possible spoiler from within Netanyahu's own ruling coalition. There's a possible spoiler from the Iranian side. There's obviously a lot of concern about what happens in terms of domestic Lebanese dynamics as well. So we're not out of the woods yet, and we won't be for a while. Let's see if the first 30 days of a truce, this isn't even a real ceasefire, hold. And let's see if both parties to this conflict, Israel and Hezbollah, actually do what they're supposed to do, which is withdraw and stop the fighting. And let's take it one step at a time.
Yeah, and if there is if the truce does hold, if the ceasefire does hold over 60 days, what would be required, in your view, to make a prolonged peace work? That didn't, after 2006, there was a relatively prolonged peace. But, this time, what do you think it would take? Presumably, Iran has a lot of say over Hezbollah for a start.
Well, the big difference, first of all, with 2006 is that, believe it or not, after 2006, there was a tacit agreement between Hezbollah and Israel about rules of engagement. So they had decided that they could fire at each other within a certain perimeter and not beyond. That is not going to happen this time around. One, because of the trauma of October 7th, 2023, Israel's risk profile has changed tremendously. And second, because they have degraded Hezbollah in a very significant manner. What has to change compared to even 2006 and that UN resolution that ended the 2006 war, which is 1701, is one, this oversight mechanism that the US and France are supposed to now have to make sure that the withdrawals are happening and that the fire does cease. It needs an enforcement mechanism. Right now, it doesn't have an enforcement mechanism, which means that if Israel decides or assesses that Hezbollah is rebuilding its capabilities, it is going to open fire again and attack Lebanon. And we know, because we've seen over the past year, that the US administration is going to allow them a very, very large definition of what self-defense is. And France doesn't really have much leverage in that. And so what needs to happen in conjunction is a supercharging of the capabilities of the Lebanese army in order to enable it to take control of the south, make sure that Hezbollah does not go south of the Litani River, but also to make sure that it has the capabilities to defend southern Lebanon from any Israeli attacks, which will be very important for its credibility.
Sorry to interrupt you, but how is the Lebanese military going to be? It's not as powerful as Hezbollah at the moment. Well, we don't know the state Hezbollah's in now, but how do you supercharge, as you say it, the Lebanese armed forces? Does that mean that European countries, for instance, are going to have to start providing weapons and training and all that kind of stuff? Is that what you're looking at? Because then you've got to ask what Israel would make of all that.
I think you put your finger on the wound, really. That is the big strategic question that the Europeans have to answer, but also that America has to answer, and the Arab countries. So you'll remember in 2014, there was a big, very important deal between Saudi Arabia and France that basically consisted of providing $2 to $3 billion in material support to the Lebanese military to provide it with actually important capabilities like howitzers, like anti-artillery capabilities, basically air defenses, and drones, and an ability to make sure that they can collect proper intelligence. That is not on the table right now. That is going to be one of the big challenges that, for example, French President Emmanuel Macron has. He's going to try to corral that. And on the other hand, he is going to try to get more troops deployed within UNIFIL to start, and then possibly add on troops. So you have to see whether France can spare some troops. You have to see whether Italy, Spain, Poland, and others are able to basically up their presence.
Okay. Rim, Momtaz, appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. You're watching the News Hour. Coming up, Benjamin Netanyahu confirms he'll recommend a ceasefire deal with Hezbollah to the Israeli cabinet tonight. We'll have more analysis, and we may even play a little of what he said after the break.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C. Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Katie Spencer, and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent.
I'm Lisa Dowd, and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends.
We've got a heck of a race. This is when the Premier League properly clicks into gear. With the reigning champions against perhaps their most likely challengers. Liverpool, Manchester City, the summit meeting of English football's top two.
Liverpool, Manchester City on USA.
I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Let's get more now on the breaking news this hour that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said a short time ago that he will recommend a ceasefire deal with Hezbollah to the Israeli cabinet this evening. His statement followed continued Israeli airstrikes on the Lebanese capital Beirut throughout the day.
I'm looking at all of the fronts simultaneously. I'm seeing the bigger picture. And I am determined to let our soldiers, our brave soldiers, and give them all of the means they need to stay alive, stay safe, and bring us the victory. And that's why tonight I will bring before the cabinet a plan for a ceasefire in Lebanon. The duration of the ceasefire depends on what happens in Lebanon. We have an understanding with the United States. We are maintaining our full liberty to take military operations. If Hezbollah tries to attack us, if it arms itself, if it rebuilds infrastructure next to the borders, we will attack them. If they launch missiles, if they dig tunnels, we will attack.
Benjamin Netanyahu in the last hour. Let's speak now to Robert Clark. He's Director of the Defence and Security Unit at the Civil Affairs Policy Institute, Civitas, also served in the British military. Rob, thank you very much for being with us. And first of all, let's get straight to it. Do you think this ceasefire, if it happens as we think it will survive?
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me. I think the key question, whether it's going to survive, I think it's going to be enacted. There's been an enormous amount of pressure from Washington, and Benjamin Netanyahu seems broadly supportive of the terms so far. But the question of its survival really depends on the Israeli government and the cabinet keeping united front, supporting it. We can already see there's been great dissent already this evening from the far right of the party. Former Prime Minister Bennett has come out and publicly criticised the potential deal and the terms of it, saying it's not really ensuring Israeli security in the north of Israel, crucially to allow those tens of thousands of Israeli civilians to return to villages which have been attacked by Hezbollah over the last 13 months. So I think there's going to be an enormous amount of pressure from the right of the Israeli government, and really we can see whether that's going to last, I think, quite soon.
How much of it, though, do you think the Israeli military is being stretched? And I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu made the point. He said there were 3 reasons for the timing, one of which was he was quite honest about it, to refresh our troops and rearm. And I guess it's difficult to see how they can go on fighting on 2 fronts indefinitely.
No, quite right. And I think it's important to note it's not just 2 fronts that the Israelis have been really engaged on. It's about 3 or 4. They've had operations in Damascus, in Syria. They've still got one eye strategically to Iran, which is, the vital ground in this wider campaign. And I think to your question, is it going to stretch the Israeli forces? I don't believe it's a question of them being stretched. I think it's a question of sort of sustainability and long term. We can see that the Israeli forces are going to maintain some form of physical presence in Gaza, potentially for at least another 12 months, in order to obviously minimise the chances of October the 7th last year ever happening again to Israel. And also really with one eye, like I said earlier, to the strategic game played with Iran. And I think that's where Washington is going to come in increasingly more influential from January with President Trump, or President-elect Trump and his team, which are going to take a much firmer stance on Iran. And we can really see the pressure on Tehran ratcheting. And I think this is Israel really starting to recalculate their force postures in order to actually deter further aggression by Iran in the long term.
All right. Rob Clark, appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. We've got 3 or 4 minutes, Dominic, to wrap this thing up. Interesting what he says there about American politics, and we're going to hear from Joe Biden, I think, sometime tonight. He'll want this as, a small part of his legacy. He'll hope it survives, of course. But let's talk about it. Hezbollah, badly damaged, clearly. Not much choice other than to try and do a deal.
Not much choice for Hezbollah, as you say, decimated now, deciding it seems to regroup and to prepare to fight another day, far distance in the future. Not much choice for Israel either, in the sense that it was facing the choice of it's got as far as the Litani River, and it could either stay there, it could push on towards Beirut, or it could occupy southern Lebanon. Occupations of Lebanon have not gone well for Israel in the past. It would not be popular to stay there. And so the kind of dynamic was heading towards some kind of withdrawal for Israel, particularly as this olive branch has been offered by Naim Qassem, the Hezbollah leader, the new leader, saying that we're not going to insist on a ceasefire in Gaza with Hamas before we negotiate a ceasefire with Israel. So Israel seems to be now deciding to sort of bank the gains it's made in Lebanon, but also what's going on in the minds of the Ayatollahs in Iran. They've seen their enemies degraded massively in Lebanon, degraded massively in Hamas. Do they want to be in a situation where their allies are still fighting a low-grade artillery and air war with Israel, as Donald Trump, the man who took out Qasem Soleimani, one of their key leaders, very unpredictably, re-enters the White House? They don't want to be in that situation. So therefore, I think the assumption is they are calling in or urging Hezbollah to go for a ceasefire as well. I think a lot of the diplomacy has been the Biden administration pushing towards this, but also I think it's a question of what are minds in the region thinking about Donald Trump heading towards the White House, and what's that doing to their calculations?
I mean, Biden and Trump had that conversation, awkward though it probably was, at the White House recently. I mean, where do you think Trump and Biden are on this? I mean, Biden clearly wants a deal, and a peace deal, wants to see a peace deal. Presumably, Trump wants the same.
Yeah, and I think the Israelis want to not look like troublemakers as well. So it suits them to be in a situation where they are not provoking. They can now say to Trump, look, we try to make peace with Hezbollah. And if Hezbollah break the truce, then they can go to Trump and say, right, we need to go back in heavily against Hezbollah, but also potentially against Iran. So a lot of this is, while Biden's going to claim credit for the ceasefire deal, a lot of it is positioning themselves, posturing themselves ahead of Donald Trump returning to the White House.
Yeah, OK, Dom, thanks very much indeed. And we should just make the point that this is a ceasefire deal with Hezbollah we're talking about, not with Hamas in Gaza. Joe Biden expected to speak within the hour. You were watching the News Hour. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Coming up, Benjamin Netanyahu confirms he'll recommend a ceasefire deal with Hezbollah to the Israeli cabinet tonight. We'll hear, as I was saying, from President Biden, and that will be during the Politics Hub with Sophie Ridge, who is next.